now at this point in life, we can just go live. We got our comments over here. We've got a nice little live show showing up. It looks like my headset is working. That's a good start. Sip the old tea and pour the new tea. Let's do the live pouring of the tea. This is everyone's favorite part of this show, and people usually like to tune in, especially on the podcast. My microphone's probably good enough to filter out the sound of the tea pouring, which is too bad. I should get like a tea pouring sound effect so I can add it in post. But I don't have that yet, so I won't. Welcome to the Friday live show. Oh, I'm just gonna sit back, relaxed. Friday's hat day right now. We're rocking some cool hats. This hat is from a store called La Macarena, which is a woman in Mexico who custom builds all her hats. And what I like about it is the wide brim that's very flat. It's very nice against the sun. And Victoria has been crazy hot right now, ludicrously hot. And I guess we're doing it, guys. We're hitting records, world records for how hot Victoria is getting. Yay us. Not just Victoria, rather, the world. So that's the way it goes. I'm going to bring up my live show here. I'm going to mute this, and then I can see comments as they show up. I kind of like that. And then I can put my topics here. Okay, I think we've got it all set up. Welcome back from my break, Adam. Way to go. Oh, my tea on my left hand. So I'm fresh back from the break. I had Allison on the show last week, which I hope you enjoyed. And this week it's just me. It's just solo bolo Adam yapping about topics. We've got some pretty good topics. They've been sort of building up over the course of June, as tends to be the case. So thank you everyone that submitted topics. Seth, Corey, Austin. I think there might have been one more. But in any event, thank you for bringing your topics into the space. It's such a help. It makes such a difference when we have cool things to talk about instead of me trying to come up with what's cool. What are the kids like? I'm not so good at that anymore. So we'll be talking about what do coaches do that hurt rather than help their clients, and I'll talk about that from the lens of not just coaching, but also from leadership. Talk about supporting people in victimhood. How do you do that? How do you support someone like that? We'll talk about the notion of deep work in leadership and coaching. I'm going to talk about Tony Robbins, tools, approaches, NLP, and transformation. And then I'll talk about the art of distinguishing and what I call the problem with the problem. And maybe more aptly would be the problem with the solution. So I'm going to try to dig into all of that time of standing. And then to start us off, I want to talk about like coming back in, coming back from time off. So, and I probably talk about this a fair bit every time I come back from vacation. So I apologize if I'm in reruns here, but I think it's kind of important because it's a significant part of taking that time off. So when I take time off, I'm away from email, I'm away from work in general. I don't usually schedule any calls, and life is pretty relaxed. And the other thing that I do is I don't run any kind of real routine for myself. I don't tend to work out. I don't exercise. I play pickleball. I do the stuff that I do for fun, but I don't go and get up in the morning and lift weights like I do the rest of the time. I don't do the stuff that is not so much fun. Lifting weights for me is not particularly enjoyable. And if you're someone that does enjoy lifting weights, way to go you. You probably look good, and you're probably cut, and you probably look like you enjoy ice cream less than I do. That's okay. So my months off tend to be like a lot of me staying up nice and late because I'm not committed to getting up early in the morning. They tend to be I let go of any obligation on my part to respond to emails in a timely fashion, all of that sort of stuff. And there's a couple of things I notice happen as I do this, some of the stuff I've been distinguishing, and then I want to talk about what happens as we come to the edge of that time and then this period I'm in now. So one of the things I notice happening during these times off is that blissfully I'm doing a lot of like whatever I would do just for enjoyment. Like this month was just play video games. Street Fighter put out a new version of Street Fighter called Street Fighter 6. I love Street Fighter. It's probably my favorite of all the fighting games, and fighting games are my pedigree. That's what I grew up playing, and and I continue to play. And rocking with zero viewers here. This is a popular topic. And part of the essence of who I am is passion. And so people like me, if you're someone who is passion, you don't halfway do things. You don't like stuff. You either love it or you're completely uninterested in it. And so for some people, they like to pick up a game, play it a little bit. That was kind of fun. Now we'll go over here and we'll do that thing. Not for me. For me, what I like to do is once I find something I love it. I read about it. I study it. I do my best to like improve at it. And so I'm not just casually playing Street Fighter. I am actively training to be the best at it. I'm reading strategy articles. I'm setting aside time so that I can do drills, so that I can like execute complicated combos without dropping them, all of this sort of stuff. Hey, Jess, nice to see you. Good morning. It's hat day. So, so I'm devoting a lot of time to this, which feels good for a month. And even then it starts to feel bad. If I was doing this with like nothing but my life, I would want to like either be earning income from doing this or whatever. But as a hobby that I'm deeply kind of stoked about, it's fine for that month. But what I notice starts to happen is I'll get up, I'll eat breakfast, I'll sit down, I'll start playing games, and then I have this over time, this increasing feeling like I'm wasting the day. There's more I should be doing. The day starts to feel more scarce. And then when the day starts to feel scarce, I feel this need to pile in more stuff. I need to do more. I need to make sure that I'm making the most of this day. And that's going to be a natural product of spending a day just playing video games. So it's kind of interesting because I'm letting go of the need to be productive, and then there's this second part that comes on that's like, but you're not being productive enough. And when that's showing up, it's an interesting dynamic I get into where I'm not gonna go and like do the stuff that really has me feel like I'm making the most of the day. I'm not gonna go and answer emails. I'm not gonna go and do work. I'm not even gonna like clean my house or anything like that. Instead, what I try to do is like, how do I make the most of this time spent playing video games? So then I'll have a TV show playing at the same time. And then like, if I was drinking, I'd start to drink. Like I'm just cramming in more sensation. I'm sort of chasing after this need to make the most of this day that I've, on some level, kind of decided is not going to be made the most of. I'm just a day to play games to have fun. And so I get this urgency that starts to show up in me, this need to make the day be more significant than it is, this need to turn a fan on because my office is getting a little bit warm. Let's do that right now. There you go. This need to almost like to not have the day be exactly what I've already decided the day is going to be. And while that need is there, I'm simultaneously resistant to actually doing anything that would create the sense of productivity. So that sort of is like a growing experience as the month goes on, which you could imagine would kind of make sense. Of course, the longer I spend not really on purpose, the longer I spend kind of divorced from what I'm on this planet to do, so to speak, the more just naturally I'm going to start to have that show up. And it starts to really pick up a lot as I get towards the end of the time. And as I get towards the end of a month off, a couple things happen. The first thing that happens is I get anxious about coming back. I get very like, what have I neglected? What haven't I done? I'm starting to shift my mindset away from I don't have to do anything to like, I'm returning to the world where I do have to do stuff, or where I choose into a life where I'm doing stuff that matters to me and matters to other people. And what I've been distinguishing for myself over this past month is that I I get very conflicted as I come towards the end of the month. I'm conflicted because there's a part of me that knows, like a deepest part of me that's like the next thing to do is to start to embrace structure again, to come back into regularity, to come back into going to bed at the same time, to come back to getting up at the same time, to come back to meditating with regularity, to come back to lifting weights, doing all of that sort of stuff. And I resist that, and then I know that that's what there is for me to do. So I get especially fidgety and kind of especially clutchy towards the end of this time off. kind of like a lot of us feel on a Sunday. Sunday evening, you're like, the weekend's ending. I'm not getting the most. I have to go back to, that kind of feeling, the Sunday evening feeling. And then we come back. So this week, what coming back has looked like has been um, consistently going to bed at the same time. For the most part, consistently getting up at the same time, consistently lifting weights, consistently eating breakfast, like consistency, reestablishing that. And this is the period this week and the next, so usually when I have the most resistance to this. So that's a bit of a challenge. It's not that, I could look at that resistance and make it really significant, but I don't really hold it significant. It's more just this is the nature of choosing into a structure, is we're always going to have a little bit of resistance because it's easier not to. It's easier just to stay up. The other thing that I've noticed has been present for me this time coming back has been a sense of like disillusionment with my work. So over the past week here, I've kind of I've had thoughts, feelings, experiences, sensations of like, does this really matter? Is what I'm doing actually making a difference for anyone? Is what I do with my own coach making a difference? Or is it just sort of like I talk to her and I feel a bit better and then I do my best and then life just happens as it does? And that sort of experience and feeling is not unfamiliar to me. It's not the first time I felt that way, and it definitely won't be the last time I felt that way. And it shows up every so often from time to time. And the irony of that is like I'm avoiding bringing that to my coach. So I kind of have that there for me, like that's alive for me. And then I'm like, what I want to do is not look at that and instead just immerse myself back into more video, like just avoid everything, just play more video games. And I've been, I've been really good with what I would call like my spiritual sobriety, meaning I've been, for the most part over the course of this vacation, eating quite healthy and not touched a drop of alcohol and not smoked any weed. It's been 5 years since I've smoked weed, but nevertheless, over the course of this month and this last week, boy, have I been craving it. There's just been this part of me that's like, I want to feel different than I feel. And so I'm sitting in the work of that. I'm sitting in the work of um, feeling those desires and then practicing checking in with myself. Like, what is it that touching those vices or those habits would allow me to feel? Like, what am I craving in this moment? And alongside that, what am I feeling underneath this moment that I don't really want to feel? So there's like two parts, right? Oh, if I got stoned, I would feel like the day was full and I would feel alive and I would feel like passionate. And right now I'm feeling like over this past week, I'm feeling a little bored, a little apathetic, a little disillusioned. So I wouldn't have to feel that way and I wouldn't have to be with feeling those things. And instead, the annoyance of this work, when I'm not on my time off, right? During my time off, I give myself permission to just escape from that stuff. I don't have to, I can numb myself and I'm allowed in quotes to do that. I let that be the way it is for me. But as I come back into structure, to regularity, to supporting other people, I have a commitment to support myself and to sit with this stuff. And so I'm in what I like to call kind of the dog shit of transformation, which is like just being in the mundane. There's not a lot of magic right now. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that it won't come back. It's just that right now, the work isn't that inspiring for me. And I'm just being with that. So that's where I'm at kind of in terms of coming back in. And I want to share that before we go into this other stuff because I think it's important. It's such an integral part of the experience of living and like walking a spiritual path. That's why I'm wearing this hat. There's proof that I'm walking a spiritual path and um and living a life of transformation. In Zen teachings, they talk about before enlightenment, you chopped wood and you carried water. And after enlightenment, you chopped wood and you carry water. There's life doesn't change. Enlightenment doesn't mean you suddenly stop doing all that stuff and you get to float up to heaven and just walk around like a beam of light. That happens once we die in whatever version of the afterlife you want to choose for yourself. But here on earth, enlightenment doesn't change any of that, or rather, it doesn't mean that stuff stops. It just means we change who we're being as we're doing that stuff. And so that's the path I'm walking. Let's see what you wrote here, Jess. Jess writes, this is incredibly comforting to hear. With my film life, I have these transitions between uber structured and uber not structured constantly between shows. And I struggle a lot with these sensations. Uh-huh. Yeah, that what we call like a liminal space can be really, I find that really challenging. So much so that I've looked like, would it be better to take less time off more frequently? Like instead of 2 months off a year, 2 weeks off 4 times a year or something along those lines. I don't know that I haven't settled on that being the idea, the thing to do, but I notice this stuff and I notice the challenge that it can be. So that's how this week has been. And now that I've shared that, I'm going to be super fucking inspiring as I answer these questions. I thought that was funny. So a bunch of cool topics. Let's start at the top. So Austin, former Forge member, hello Austin, asks, what do coaches and leaders do that hurt more than help their clients? There's a bunch of things. The first thing that coaches and leaders do that hurt rather than help their clients, and this is not going to be any surprise to anyone, is they don't hold the work they're doing with like a degree of sacred reverence. And what I specifically mean by that is that they don't ensure that they themselves are being supported by a coach or a leader. Or they let themselves off the hook with half measures. Oh, I'm friends with this guy, Adam, and he's a coach. And so when we talk, he sort of helps me see stuff that's a half measure. And so when coaches and leaders take this on and tell a story to themselves like, oh, I'm already supported, or I've got enough, or I've got a network of friends, or I'm part of this mastermind, where all of that stuff is kind of, it's a half measure that doesn't fully get you across the line. And when coaches and leaders take this on, what ends up happening is that their blind spots remain obscured. And from not being able to see your blind spots, you impose your blind spots on the people you're supporting. So I'll give you a really quick example here. Imagine that you grew up with a scarcity around money. Maybe your family was poor. Maybe you were constantly told by your parents, we're worried about money and, blah, 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 blah. It's always going to run out. Maybe you witnessed poverty, whatever. Or maybe you had tons of money, but you were constantly in fear of it running out. Whatever it happens to be, you grew up with a scarcity of money. So that's your context. And so to overcome that problem that money's going to run out, you learn to become really good at making a bunch of money. So on the surface, it looks like you're successful and you've overcome the problem of your poverty, but you haven't. You've just changed the circumstances of your life on the surface. Underneath, and you see this all the time with people that have learned to create a lot of money from this place, all the time, you're still worried about money. I had a client who had she created like $1 million in a year, and part of her work with me, she got $1 million set aside in the bank. And we came back and talked like years later, still terrified about money running out because she wasn't able to get underneath that story. So when we change what lies on top, when we change the way our circumstances look in our life, it occurs differently, but it's actually not. So imagine we've got this coach or this leader who has done that in their life. They have sort of created this way of staying one step ahead of their fear by making a lot of money. And the fear is the money's going to run out. And so their life would probably look like a lot of focus on the markets or on how to make the next amount of money, or like if I could just get a little bit more money in the bank, or all of that sort of stuff. And then they're going to draw clients to them because they're selling this story that I used to be afraid of money, and now I learned how to make a whole bunch of money, and I'm never afraid of money, because they can't see their fear. They really believe they've solved this. I can help you do that. And they're going to draw clients to them that have the same underlying fears, the same scarcity there. And they're going to train their clients, their leadees, in adopting the same kind of strategy to try to outrun their fear that they have. And what neither of these two people, the client or the coach, can see is that actually they have done no real work to overcome their fear. They haven't moved beyond their fear. They haven't created the breakthrough. They've just created this state in life where as long as they keep making money, as long as they know the next million is coming in, then their fear is kind of assuaged. So it's almost as though they've got a broken leg and it hurts when they walk on it, and so they figured out a really good painkiller. They're like, I used to have a broken leg and it really hurt me, but now I take aspirin every day and it's not so bad and I don't feel fear and I can do anything I want, provided I constantly take aspirin every day. And provided I've made sure that I've got a constant stream of aspirin coming in. And oh my God, my doctor just like took a vacation. I need to figure out where the next aspirin. Okay, I found it. I can breathe again. And then they provide that same solution. So it looks like they're helping people. It looks like they're giving their people exactly what they want. But what they're not doing is supporting people to create what they need, supporting people to actually create breakthroughs. So that's the first thing that coaches and leaders really do that harms rather than helps people. And the hard part about it is that it occurs so helpful. And it looks like in truth, they're providing the person exactly what the person thinks they need, but it's actually not at all what they need. It's what their ego needs. It's what their fear believes they need rather than what they actually need. Is my eye puffy? Looks like I've got a bit of a swollen eye there. Maybe it's just a shadow cast by this brim. The second thing that coaches and leaders do that harm rather than hurt people, and I want to preface this a bit, I'm talking harm them transformationally rather than flat out harm them. So I'm gonna elaborate on that. The thing that people do that harm rather than help people is help them, is teach them, is give them solutions, is tell them how to do something. Now, how could that be harming them, Adam? It's obviously helping them. Now the person knows how to do something that they didn't before. It's important to recognize, excuse me, it's important to recognize that when we're talking transformationally, we're operating in a different like axis. We're not operating on the surface anymore. We're looking towards like what is going to help this person become more self-actualized, more fully expressed as themselves in their life. So every time I go and teach or help someone, what happens is that person becomes dependent on me. What that person learns is that in my life, the way that I move forward is I seek out experts and I get their support. They tell me what to do. And what that creates is this cycle where I go to the limits of my current knowledge and then I stop until I can find someone else to tell me how to do it, to help me figure out what to do, to blah, 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 blah. I never learn how to discover something on my own. And this will work to a limited extent, but if you imagine trying to learn how to ride a bike this way, it'll never work. You'll always get closer and closer. It'll feel like you're getting closer and closer to riding that bike. And tomorrow I'm actually going to get on the bike. And then tomorrow comes and you're like, after I get just a little bit more knowledge. And so as coaches and leaders, when we declare that we're standing for transformation, when we decide that's what we want to support people to do, helping people gets in the way. Helping people cuts their process and it makes them more reliant rather than less reliant. At Rhythmia, where I work, we have like a placard, like a plaque that has sort of like a fundamental principle. And the fundamental principle is that everyone has a process that they must go through, and their process is sacred. And our job, supporting people as they work with medicine, is to get out of the way of that process and guide them back into their process. So if someone's like, man, I had a really rough night and like what I saw was how I'm a thief or like I'm dishonest and what should I do? What they're asking is for me or someone else to give them an answer. And in fact, as soon as I give them the answer, I'm getting in the way of their process. What's going to set this person free on their journey, their spiritual path, is letting them sit in the struggle of being with that experience. If I give them an answer, they no longer have to sit in this experience of discovering who they have learned to become in the world. And so I shortcut all of that and cut off their process. So as a coach and a leader, our job is to really to get that someone's process is sacred and they have to be in it. And however someone's struggling, that's an essential aspect of their journey towards more actualization. And the only way you can really get this beyond intellectually kind of understanding it is for you to walk that path yourself. And the way you walk that path yourself is you work with a coach, you work with a leader, you take programs like the Forge, you do that sort of work. Daniel writing, I had $1,000, but I took two Excedrin and it's gone. Yeah, $1,000 doesn't go that far these days. It's a good party though. Um, so these are like the two biggest things I see coaches and leaders really get stuck on. And we do so much work helping people unlearn this habit when they come into the Forge to start working with us. If anyone does consulting work or has a history of leadership, corporate leadership where they've led people, this is like it's become such almost guaranteed such a pattern. They are locked in to helping people, and it's very frustrating for them as they're trying to see how this is a burden, how this gets in the way. And the irony is most of these people, when they come into the work, they're exhausted. They have a total time scarcity because they've created a life where they are the linchpin for everyone. When you have to help everyone and teach everyone, it's good for your ego because you get to feel like you're the one. You're helping people. You're doing the shit. But it requires so much of your energy. And so your leadership becomes unsustainable. It's exhausting. So what I'm describing is one of the best ways to create an abundance of time is to stop helping people so much. Instead, support people to discover their own truth, support people to learn how to stand on your own feet, support people to be in their process and to love them as they're in their process and remind them how great they're doing. That's the hard work. Hey, Sarah, it's nice to see you. Sarah writes, seek out experts for inspiration while looking inwards to find your own personal truth of what you witness from them. Might find some resistance, might find that what you witness from others is not what your path is. Certainly, so what I think Sarah is suggesting here is like, by all means, seek out experts. But as you seek them out, look internally to find your personal truth. What is true for me? Which I wholeheartedly agree with, and then I want to offer like a caveat here. Um, Here's the caveat. Most of us have been trained societally and by our parents and by school and by the corporate complex. We've been trained that the way you move forward in life is you seek an expert and you take on what they say. That's what most of us have been trained in. And so when Sarah writes, or whenever someone says like, well, seek out experts, but then check in with your own personal truth, the caveat is it's a slippery slope. We can sort of, it's sort of like an alcoholic saying like, well, I want to stop drinking alcohol, but I don't want to like have to say goodbye to all of my friends, and I don't want to have to never show up to an event that has alcohol at it. So I'm going to stop drinking, but I'm going to go hang out at bars with my friends when they go there and so on and so forth. On the one hand, totally, that's the aspiration that we're moving towards, is we want to be able to show up anywhere in life and like seek out experts or not, but so that we can be fully sovereign as we do so. But as we are untraining, as we are unlearning certain things, what best serves us typically is to like remove it entirely as a practice, not a rule to follow, but a practice. Because when we remove that entirely, what happens is we can't go down that slippery slope. And as we start to learn how to practice without seeking out experts or without doing whatever the thing is that might be a little bit hooky for us, we start to get better at discerning the two. Discernment requires kind of a period of like abstinence or of separation for us to start to learn. What most of us want to do is we want to jump straight from being totally reliant on something to being able to discern it. Or at least that's what I always want to do. I always want to like, when I first started letting go of smoking pot, I really wanted to, initially it was like, well, I have no control here. Once I smoke one joint, I'm going to get up and wake and bake and I'm going to get stoned for the whole day and blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll set some guidelines and then I'll have like one joint a day. It never worked because I needed separation before I could start to create that discernment. Eventually, I just chose not to entirely, but that's a choice. We want to practice creating that discernment first. We want to create separation from something so that we can learn new muscles. And as we do that, then we'll be better able to kind of to do what Sarah's pointing to as like an aspirational place to get to, where we do work with experts, but we bring it internally and like, well, how does this land? What does this bring up for me? How does this sit? Great suggestion, Austin. Thank you for that question. Okay, let's talk about supporting people in their victimhood. Um, this is a question from Seth. So I'm going to read what he's written so that we have the preface here, and then we'll talk about this. So he says, I have someone close to me who is trapped in a really strong cycle of pride and blame, and it's rendering them helpless to affect anything in their life. In particular, they blame the states, the system, white people, colonizers, the system, et cetera, et cetera. And they've largely pulled away from their family, they're poor, and their long-term plan is to just get by and play video games. I know from conversations that deep down they're unhappy and scared, and the plan is to continue to avoid anything that could cause them pain. I'm one of the last people that this person communicates with, but our relationship has become rocky ever since I've begun trying to show them that they can take back the power in their life. I have someone close to me in my life who lived their entire life unhappy like that, and I want to show this person a different way. I'm wondering if this was someone you loved, Adam, how would you approach it? Would you kick down the door, try to inspire them through modeling behavior, or just trust that they will find their way? I'm not going to lie, deep down, that last one, trusting that they find their way, seems like bullshit to me, especially because the other person that I was close to never found their way out. Thanks for your help. So ultimately, what we're talking about here is a state of ad-effectness or victimhood. There's a bunch to unpack in this question. I love the detail that you provided, Seth. Thank you so much. So we've got one topic, which is ad-effectness, victimhood. Ad-effectness is distinct from being at cause in our life. When we're at cause, we are the cause for something. I am going to make something happen in my life, regardless of my circumstances. At cause, well, I'll provide an example in a sec. So that would be at cause. At effect is, I would do this except for my circumstances, whatever they happen to be. I would do this except for the system. It holds me down. I would do this except for the fact that my parents raised me this way. I would do this except for the fact that Mercury is in retrograde. Poor Mercury, always getting blamed for everything. Interestingly enough, it just keeps rotating the same direction. It doesn't move back. It just looks like it's moving backward. Funny. So that's at effectness. I am at the effect of my circumstances. What I can create in my life, how I can be, how I can make results happen is all at the effect of the circumstances of my life, as opposed to at cause. I am the cause, the sole cause for whether or not something happens in my life. We call at the effect victimhood. But I don't like using that term because victim is a blamey label. And as soon as you even as soon as I say that word, we're predisposed to be like, not fucking me. I hate the idea of being a victim. I would never be that. And then now we're in a raft of problems because you are vested to not see the places where you are at the effect in your life. And heads up, you are. I am. All of us are. It's human to be at effect in certain places and at cause in other places. You're not going to avoid that. Not even the greatest leaders, the most fully expressed people in the world are able to escape this. So it's much more powerful for us to start to bring compassion and like grace to ourselves so that we can start to see the places we're at the effect of life as opposed to fighting it. Anytime we move from an at effect state in our life to an at cause state, the end result is we become more empowered. We have a more empowering experience of ourselves, and we are able to create more of the life that we want. Our life stops being at the mercy of whatever's happening in the world around us, and it starts to become a life by our own design. And that's just going to leave you feeling more empowered, bigger, spiritually bigger as yourself. That's the first part. An example of at effectness versus at causeness, and one that has some nuance in that I like to use is like someone saying, I 100% want to take this program. I am so committed. I just have to find out first. My video just paused. Catch up to me, video. I think we're caught up. Guys in the comments, let me know if it's weird and laggy and if stuff's going on. I'm going to stop my computer from backing up if it's doing that. It's not. I don't have to stop but I'll shut down some stuff. Close this. We'll close this. Yeah, let's get some speed going here. Definitely close that. And Slack, you can get lost too. So I definitely want to do this program. I've looked at it. This is the thing I need to do. I'm totally committed to this. I just need to find out if my work will pay for it. That's the last thing. And if they will, I'm totally in. That is an at the effect conversation. Thanks, Sarah. That is a situation where someone is saying they're 100% committed to something, except as long as that their work pays for the program. At cause would be, I 100% want to do this program. I'm so clear this is the thing. I'm going to check with my work to see if they're going to pay for it. But if not, I'm going to make this happen one way or the other. I'll see if I can borrow money. I will do this. I will do that. As soon as I mention that example, people start to get defensive. Well, yeah, but Adam, not everyone has the money to do something, or not everyone can afford that program, or. And what I love about that reaction that we tend to have is that is how we end up staying in our at effectness. It's not that you're bad or wrong for being at the effect of your circumstances. It's simply that you are less empowered as an individual because in that state. And it takes something from us to make that shift. It's not just like, oh, I'm so glad Adam gave me that distinction. Now I'm just going to choose to be at cause all the time. Wherever we are defending why we have to sort of be like, I'll do it as long as, that is a place where we are inadvertently defending our at effectness to life. And so the work of shifting from that is a challenging one because it means we have to recognize that defensiveness and we have to practice setting it down so that we can choose over here. So all of this is a lot of prefacing for Seth's question, but I think it's important because as soon as we're going to start to talk about this, people might have a reaction. And the reaction may be like, fuck you, Adam, you don't know this person's life. You're right. But that's not so important because all I'm going to talk about is more broadly the state of being at the effect of something versus being at cause and how we can start to shift out of one into the other if we want. There's one last part I want to speak to here, which is on the topic of DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it's a challenging one because this is a laden topic. So I'm not going to say too much about this, but there's a nuance, and the nuance is this. Fundamentally, transformation is about moving people from being at the effect of their circumstances to being at cause for the life they want to create. Fundamentally, DEIB is a conversation that meets people in a degree of at effectness. I'm not saying it's wrong. Remember, being at the effect is not bad. But in a DEIB conversation, where we're looking is there's a system holding you down. And my job, whoever I happen to be, is to address that system so that you are no longer held down. That's important. That's a really important conversation. But it's also important that we notice that that is fundamentally relating to people in a state of at effectness. I'm not saying we need to do anything. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be that way, but what I want to do is highlight that on some level, a transformational conversation and a DEIB-based conversation will come into a degree of conflict with one another. Because at some point, the transformational conversation sounds like this. Yes, you are right about all of those things. Yes, you are right that bananas are biased against and because you like that fruit, blah, 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 blah. And what do you want to make happen in your life, notwithstanding any of the circumstances? We don't pick and choose the circumstances that we're going to step over when we are stepping into an at-cause conversation. So it's really important just that I speak to that part so we can recognize that there's a degree of clashing there. We can't step over that fact. It doesn't mean that therefore we should drop the DEIB conversation, and it doesn't mean therefore that the transformational conversation should like fold itself into the DEI and we, it doesn't mean any of that. It's just important that we recognize there is two distinct conversations, and if we try to like tell ourselves that they can both perfectly coexist, we are doing a disservice to both sides. We have to recognize, is this a time to support someone in a DIB conversation, or is this a time to support someone in in a transformational conversation? And we got to bring it to them and say, and like draw out this distinction so they can choose. The reason distinctions are valuable is because they put us to this. They force us to recognize we can't do both of these things. I can't eat the cake and stay really thin. Personally, I recommend eating the cake. Cake rules. Okay, ready to have your question answered, Seth? It's a long one. So we got this person who is in a conversation with themselves that they're held down. The system, the United States, the world, global warming, colonizers, white people, yellow people, green people, Mars, Mercury in retrograde, whatever it happens to be, that's holding them down. So there's a state of ad-effectness in their life. And from that being true, right? So that's the story that they've got running. And they might be right, they might not be. That's not of my concern. What I am interested in is the fact that for them, it's true. For them, that story is true, whether or not it's borne out in reality. Personally, I stand for the possibility that you can create whatever you want to create. It might not be easy. It might require moving mountains. It might require a tremendous amount of work, but with support and shifting from at effect to at cause, we can create the life we want. That's the whole premise of coaching, that you can be at cause for what you want to create in your life. However, because this person has that story as true for them, they're going to take a bunch of actions that are consistent with that truth. If the entire system is weighted against me failing, why the fuck would I invest any ounce of effort into succeeding? The whole system's against me. Everything just forces me into playing video. There's no reason to do anything other than play video games. So this might require some deftness in your mental state. You have to practice setting aside the idea that, but it's true, because that ends the conversation. And instead, we want to step over to the world of our thought and how powerful our thought is. If it is true for you, if it is true in your thinking, if you hold a particular belief true, then you are going to act in alignment with that belief. So if you hold that the system or the whatever is holding you down and preventing you, you're not going to make that much effort to change things, because why bother? It's just going to be a grind anyhow, and eventually you're going to find your way back to playing video games. I need a sip of tea because there's another thought that's coming up that I want to pull out here. Second, even if I do make the effort, like even if I do try to take a swing at something, how big am I really going to swing out? Like if I have it true that there's no way I can hit a home run, then when I swing that bat, I'm gonna try to hit like a grounder. I don't know much about baseball. I think that's what you try to do. I hit a grounder and just get on base. So I'm not going to take big swings to try to make something big happen. I'm going to take half-hearted attempts, sort of like dipping your toe in the water. I'm halfway going to do, I'm going to do half measures, because otherwise I'm going to take this huge swing and then just be smacked down and proven once again how stupid I was to even think I could get out of here. So this type of thinking, this at the effect kind of thinking, creates at the effect actions, and it proves true to us. Our beliefs guide our actions, and our actions then prove that our beliefs are right in the first place. I don't take a big swing. I only halfway show up when I do make the effort, because what's the point of really taking that effort? And then because I only halfway show up, it doesn't really work, and then back we are. And eventually we get to a place where we're like, fuck it, why even try anything? Video games are fun. I'm just going to get stoned and play video games. So this is to give us a bit of an understanding of the internal state of this person that we're talking about, or any sort of people that find themselves here. Meanwhile, we've got everyone else outside of their world. Everyone else outside of their world does not necessarily share the same set of beliefs that they do. Some people will, and will commiserate with this person. Other people, perhaps like you, Seth, are like, that's not how the world is. The world doesn't keep you down. You can do blah, 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 blah. This is possible. That's possible. Again, we could get into a privilege conversation and talk about that, but That's not going to serve us because remember, that's a distinct conversation. We're talking about a conversation about someone, a transformational conversation. So we're not going to go down that path. We're going to hang out in this path. Outside of that person's brain, the rest of us are looking at this person. We're like, what we do is we don't get them. We relate to what they're doing through our own truths, our own context for how the world works. And so we conclude this person's just lazy. This person's just given up on themselves. This person doesn't really care. This person doesn't want anything more for themselves. And because that's how we're relating to their world and how they show up, we don't see the discrepancy. And so over time, we start to become more and more frustrated with them. Fuck you. That, at least that's what I say when I'm not able to access this part of myself, when I'm not able to get them, when I'm not able to empathize, that's what shows up for me. Fuck you. Get off your ass and do something. I was raised by a father who often would say, Adam, sometimes what people need is just a swift kick up the ass. That's not really, that doesn't have much in it involved in like getting someone where they're at. That's just like, you're being lazy, I'm going to kick you in your ass until you do something. And when we do that, what happens is people will do something as long as we're kicking them in the ass because that feels crappy. We become the villain of their story and nothing's changed internally. They're now just doing what they have to do to avoid getting a foot up their ass. That's what I would do. I don't want a foot up my ass. It seems unpleasant. Your foot gets shitty though. That's the other problem with my dad's story. You end up with a shitty foot. You get shit foot. My dad and his shitty feet. Anyhow, back on topic. So it doesn't work. Even if we kick people enough to get them to take action, they're taking action from inside of the system's weighted against me. It's not going to work. Nothing will make a difference. So they take half-hearted action. And again, they'll take those things, but they're not going to take swings. And they're going to take action in such a way that proves their beliefs true. And then eventually you get fed up trying to push them along. Oh, fuck it. Done. End of relationship. That's how these things tend to go. So now we can come to your question, Seth, which is like, what would you do? How would you approach it? Would you kick down the door, try to inspire through modeling behavior, or just trust that they will find their way? I would not kick down the door because kicking down the door is something we do from our own set of beliefs. We do that when we don't understand the reality for someone. And if we can really get like the story that any individual holds true for themselves is literally true for them. It's not just like a fantasy-based story that's true in their mind. It's a truth born out in reality. What I think will guide my actions. The actions I take will create a world around me, and that world around me will reinforce my beliefs. It's a perfect enclosed circle for all of us, every single one of us. I have a belief that it's possible to create whatever it is I want, regardless of my circumstances. And I act in alignment with that belief, and I create a world around me that's a reflection of that. My friends don't all have that same belief, and consequently, many of them have a world that's a reflection of their set of beliefs. And they look at me and they think, "Oh, he must just be lucky, or he lucked out, or whatever it happens to be." It's not true. I've worked hard to shift into that different state of belief, and not only to shift in terms of a belief, but to act from it. So kicking down the door doesn't work. What kicking down the door is doing is it's basically nullifying, invalidating someone's experience. You just need to get out of your story. That's not really paying much sacredness or reverence to their reality. Every single human being has a reality that is it makes complete, consistent sense with their beliefs. There's no gap. So as soon as we tell someone that's just your story, we're in trouble because we're invalidating their experience. So we don't want to do that. Inspiring them through modeling behavior. There's two parts to this. The first part is if we're trying to inspire someone else through our own behavior, we've missed the mark because now we're trying to change them, and trying to change people doesn't work. People never change when we try to force them to change. That's not where change is like created from. Change happens here, internally. So the real work is to drop the idea that someone should be anywhere other than where they are. That's hard for people because people are like, to your point, Seth, you say deep down it seems like bullshit because the person that I was close with, they never found their way out. So if I just trust that this is their way, but their way sucks, their way is their way. We have to start there. And there's people on this planet that will never be actualized, that will never be expressed. That's their way, and it's sacred. Like, we don't really understand this stuff, but spiritually speaking, many, not all, but many schools of thought hold like our soul came here for a purpose. And that purpose may be I am here to like move through karma. And the way I'm going to do that is that I'm just going to like be a victim to everything in my life. And that's the journey of this particular iteration of my soul. That is a way. So we kind of have to get that everyone's journey is sacred. There's no right way for people to be. There's no correct way to human. Trigger warning, that applies to Hitler, that applies to Jeffrey Dahmer, that applies to Obama, that applies to Trump, that applies to you, that applies to me. It doesn't mean that societally we just step back and say, that's their thing, go ahead and exterminate the Jews. We have to respond to it. But the choices that every single human being makes are a sacred choice. They are something for us to hold with reverence. I'm offering some triggering examples to like drive stuff up so that people can see like the limits to which they can hold that someone's path is someone's path. If we were dealing with Hitler or something, it'd be a different conversation. But I want to offer that example so you can kind of like notice the boundaries to which you can hold a path sacred. So we don't want to try to inspire their behavior. Having said that, living a life in which you are inspired, living a life in which you are lit up, living a life in which you are at cause for what you want to create, that's the best way to support anyone. The way you're supporting them is by modeling having a good life, not so that they change, but because then you get the benefit of having a good life. And if you live your life at cause for what you want to create, if you live your life lit up, if you live your life being fully expressed, both when you're inspired and when you're feeling apathetic, like this guy over here, when you do that, that invites something from people. It invites curiosity. It inspires people, but not because you're trying to inspire them. Instead, because you are inspired by yourself. And that's the only real way that inspiration works. What is inspiring is someone inspired by their own possibility, inspired by their own expression, inspired by living into what they can be on this planet. So definitely live your own inspired life, but let go of the idea that the person you're talking about needs to be any different. And as soon as you are trying to like, I'm going to do this because it's going to inspire them, stop that. Don't want to do that. Any thought like that is you getting into their process and no longer trusting their process. Now we can get to the final thing, which is, so what do we do then, Adam? Like, do we just say, fuck it, I leave that person, they're going to do their thing, whatever, there's nothing to do? There's no intervention to be done? Kind of. It's less about a doing and more about a being. So who we want to be is holding someone's journey as sacred. Here's what we can do to really support people here. Get them. Ask them how the world is and listen to them. And this is challenging. This requires a tremendous amount of capacity because it's going to come into conflict with our own perspective of how the world is. So my job as a coach, as a leader, when I'm supporting leaders, what I'm doing is I'm deepening their capacity and my own capacity to really set aside what I quote unquote know to be true, what I believe to be true, what I hold to be true. I'm setting that aside so I can get over there and just understand the truth of their world. That's how people start to shift. Because when we do that, when we listen to them that way, we are removing any requirement that they shift. And instead, we're giving them the experience of just being received and loved exactly as they are. We have to recognize our own capacity for this. Like, for the sort of stuff you're talking about, Seth, and like a big one for me is conspiracy theories. When people are like conspiracy theory nuts and want to talk about how like the Nazis they found their way into our government or like voting fraud and all of that sort of stuff. Look, if that's your thing, that's fine. But for me, that's a real be with. I have a hard time being with that for a few reasons. One is I was raised with a strong skeptical bent. I love critical thinking. And a lot of conspiracy-based thinking, to me, completely lacks real, genuine critical thinking. What it has is people typically getting really baked and then watching a bunch of YouTube videos and then being like, huh, thoughts? Not interested in that. So it's an edge for me when someone wants to start like spouting a lot of that stuff. It's really hard for me to just get them. That's a place where it's an edge for me to just be with someone and to listen to the world as it's true for them. So I have to recognize my capacity. I can sit there for like 10, 15 minutes. And then there's a point where I'm like, all right, well, it's great chatting with you. I'm going to go over here and refill my drink and we'll see each other later. I do that because I recognize I can give them the gift of me being over there with them and just seeing the world through their eyes for this long. And at this point now, I want to tell them to fuck off. So we just have to learn where our capacity is to be able to discern that. But those 10 minutes, those 5 minutes, those 30 seconds that you can just be with them and listen to them, that is healing. And it's healing because for once in their life, they are getting the gift of being accepted exactly as they are. And just being, that's love. I accept you as you are. I just listen to you. I'm just witnessing you as you. I'm witnessing the world as it occurs to you without needing to change it. And for people caught in the state you're describing, Seth, that's very uncommon. What they get from the world at large is people trying to change them. And if you have people pushing against you constantly, you get really good at pushing back so that you can stay where you are. This is what we all do. The more people tell us to do something different, the more we energetically buckle down on staying where we are. And so the irony is the more people try to get this person out of the victim state, the more they become entrenched in it. The more someone tries to inspire them to change out of it, the more they get locked into insisting that it's not that way. And instead, the more we relinquish needing them to be any different and just get them as they are, the more they can start to let go of their hold on it and start to get curious about what else might be there. So that's how we work with people like that. This is a big one in family relations, and it's a huge one in corporate relations. In like executive leadership, this is massive because people that tend to rise up in leadership have gotten there by like doing stuff, making things happen, teaching, and managing people. Calling it leadership, but managing people and getting people to do stuff. So people at that level of leadership are actively involved in moving people instead of helping people find the internal strength to move themselves. That's where leadership is born. When someone slowly comes around to deciding for themselves that they want to change things. And that can only happen when they are released from the obligation to do so. As long as there's obligation that they change, it's going to be really hard for them to take that on. Really, really great question, Seth. I really appreciate that. Okay, I think we've got another one here from you, Seth. Yeah, we're going to talk about Tony Robbins, NLP, tools, approaches, all of this sort of stuff, the tricks. So Seth writes that he's been a student of Tony Robbins for the past year and he found his material very useful for personal growth. I'm going to summarize a fair bit of this. And he's found that his main tools are very powerful, like the triad, the 6 human needs, incantations, nervous system integration, understanding and changing what emotions mean. Excuse me. I absolutely see that doing the deep work and aligning yourself internally is the most important part of self-improvement, and I see how Tony's material doesn't really cover it. Also, I can sort of see how alignment bypasses the need for using tools to recreate yourself. However, if I want to make running more enjoyable, I don't see why it isn't very useful to apply the 6 needs to change the meaning to myself. Basically, I'm trying to reconcile both schools of thought. I know you said you studied Tony originally, and I'm curious why you don't seem to use many of his processes. I would see Rich Litvin use some of the same tools. So this applies to Tony Robbins and his tools. This applies to NLP. This applies to internal family systems. This applies to circling, really any technique. I don't hold like there's any problem with any technique per se. Like NLP is the one I'm thinking of the most in this moment because that's like obvious. I went for lunch with this guy who was like an NLP dude, and like his hands never stopped moving. He's like, oh yeah, what I do for business I mean, he wasn't just doing them nothing. He was like drawing out his website, and my business is. But it's funny. NLP people tend to get very handy. That's part of their thing. The thing about all of these systems, all of these techniques, is exactly that they are techniques. And a technique can be very helpful, but it can also miss the mark. Just like the thing about any particular medical technique is it's a medical technique. A Band-Aid is really, really important, but it doesn't work when what's going on is that we've got a festering wound. And what I find about a lot of people that get trained in these tools, not everyone, but a lot of people that get trained in these tools, and then that's their like their thing, is that they end up like a person with a hammer and no other tools. So everything starts to look like a nail. Everything that's showing up with the client, oh, we'll use NLP. We'll change your blah 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 blah. And what's getting missed is, well, I should take a step back. What's happened is they've been trained in the tool and the use of the tool rather than having the underlying experience of learning how to see and work with being. So who we're being is like a layer that exists underneath all of this stuff. Let me see if I can concoct an example. Mm, Imagine that I have a lot of like anxiety about the opposite sex. So I like women. I want to be in a relationship with women, but I've got anxiety about it. I've got like stories about how my sexuality is inappropriate and it's wrong and it's unwelcome and blah, blah, blah. So that's who I'm being. Who I'm being is that story. When I say who I'm being is that story, I mean that like my thoughts are that story and the actions I take in the world are a product of that story. That's who I'm being. How I am being is that story when it comes to women. So we could take like techniques, approaches, like for example, pickup. Neil Strauss's pickup artist whole thing, which was like a scourge on masculinity and femininity for about a decade back in the 90s, the sort of early aughts. The idea of pickup was like, here's psychologically what creates sexual attraction. Here's how to use that to create sexual attraction. Then you can have sex. So then what you ended up having was a bunch of people who they were being was anxious, all of that stuff about sex, and then they were layering pickup on top of it. And what they would end up doing was go and have sex on top of their story, on top of who they were being. So the technique got them the thing on the surface, but it did nothing to address the underlying story. And so you ended up with a bunch of people that were now able to have sex, but they had no capacity for intimacy, no capacity to truly revel in it. It was sort of like masturbating into a woman is what they were ending up able to create. And I think if you read, I think I read Pickup because I was kind of curious about it. Married at the time, I wasn't really seeking to go do that. But I think Neil Strauss wrote a follow-up book I think it was called The Answers, maybe, where he talks about how that whole thing messed him up entirely, completely eradicated his capacity to create intimacy. This is what we're talking about. So all of these techniques, NLP, often IFS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they end up getting layered over top of the underlying way of being. And instead, what they're doing is they're addressing like the symptoms that are popping up, the surface level expression of whatever that underlying way of being is, and trying to address that, rather than having people fully trained in ontological work, in being able to feel, see, understand, hear, and speak to how someone's being and address that. And once you're doing that, then whatever technique you use can be of benefit because you're no longer applying it on the surface. You're using it to support someone below the surface. So let's use one more example. Jess says, this is bringing to mind that time we analyzed the Tiger King for people's being. That was fucking cool. Might be time to do something else like that. I enjoyed that. For those of you that didn't catch that, because Tiger King was the phenomenon at the time, and there's like a whole bunch of wacky people in that show, I thought what would be cool is that we we learn to look at them ontologically. So we distinguish the essence of people on that show as well as their survival mechanism. It was really kind of a fun little thing. Um, so here's an example of what I'm talking about. You're in a conversation with someone and you're trained in NLP, and they've got something that they want your support with, and so you're like, okay, I'm going to start to use NLP to support you with this. And as you're using it, you get them to do stuff, and they're doing a lot of like, yep, oh, got it. This is like that thing over there, that time that I did that thing. And you're like, okay, cool. And then now do this, and I don't know NLP, so forgive me if I botch it. But like, okay, I want you to visualize this, and like, oh yeah, this reminds me of that time, that other tool I did with another coach, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. And now do this. And you take them through the tool and you support them. And at the end, what's happened has happened. If you have been trained to work with people's being, you have an extra layer you can work with people on. And that extra layer would kind of sound like this. You're doing this and you're running them through the tool and you're like, I want you to try visualize. And they're like, yeah, I recognize this, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, huh, interesting. Okay. And you take them further through the tool and they keep doing that. You have the capacity, once you've been trained to see and work ontologically, to say, hey, there's something I want to share. I just want to pause what we're doing. I notice that every time I start to take you deeper into this work, you start to kind of point to how this is similar to something else. And it almost occurs like you are working to make sure that you aren't in the unknown. Like, oh, I'm okay with this because it's like that other thing that I know. And so whatever we create here is going to be like something else you know. So it just seems to me like that might kind of be denying you a bit of what's available here. And I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? So when we've done that work ontologically, which happens only when we get trained and worked with and go through this ourselves, we gain access to seeing this extra dimension that shows up. And then we can start to point to what's happening as we're using a tool, rather than just applying the tool slapdash. So to come all the way back around to your question, Seth, why don't I use some of these tools? It's because I haven't been trained in those tools. And I have plenty of tools that I've been trained in, but where I'm primarily looking with people is ontologically. And as you start to work there and just reflect to people how they're being in the middle of a conversation, as you're going through something, as you start to do that, the tools stop being as important. There's still going to be times when you're going to use them. There's going to be times when you might decide, okay, I'm going to go to like IFS, or I'm going to go and do some NLP, or like I'm going to apply some breath work here, or I'm going to teach them about a survival mechanism. There's still times when we may do all of that stuff, but it becomes less necessary because what we're working with is who they're being. And as you show that to people, that's where the real insights can start to take place. So that's why I don't use a lot of tools. Nothing wrong with any particular tool, but my stand for coaching and leadership is that we get people to be able to see, work with, hear, listen, and speak to being. And then they can apply anything they want on top of that. The same goes for assessments, right? Oh, I'm an MBITZX. That's my Myers-Briggs laser type. Cool. How are they being about getting that? How are they being about receiving that type? Oh, how they're being is that that's now determining their identity. Well, maybe that's a thing to reflect. I notice that now you're just using that as an excuse for everything you do, right? And so that's actually going to be the more valuable part. The same thing is true for 360 reviews, really. More often than not, what's more valuable than the information in the 360 review is how the person is being as they are receiving that information. So often what'll happen when I do 360 reviews and provide it to my clients is they'll get places they can improve, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I know about that one. Yeah, and I know how I do that. And what I want to do is reflect that to them, because that's the way they're not really letting this feedback in. As long as you already know all about it, you're safe. It can't really get into your heart. And so they're being kind of unimpactable. And so you could give them 6,000 360 reviews, but they're going to block it. And so the thing in the way of the transformation that they seek is their tendency to block stuff. It's not a lack of that information. That information's still valuable, but it's how they're being as they get it. That's what we really want to put in front of them. That's what will create the transformation. Okay. Uh, Last little bit we'll talk about today. Let's just see what we've got. Yeah, this is a question from Corey, a member of our leadership team in the Forge. What up, Corey? Thanks for your awesome question. Corey says he was listening to an interview with someone and they talked about context with clients. And they were talking about like the external context of the clients, like the world in which the clients exist and their stakeholders. And this person said, um, she said that a lot of coaches just want to do the deep work and that doesn't always meet the needs of the client. And so Corey asks, like, I see ontologically we do a lot of deep work, but are you just selecting clients based on their desire to be in a transformational conversation, Adam, or like how does that all pan out? So let's talk about this concept of the quote unquote a deep work. We'll do a Fry and Laurie deep work. If no one, I don't, has anyone ever seen the show Fry and Laurie? That was like one of the original awesome sketch shows out of Britain with Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie. If you've not seen it, try and track it down. Their stuff was amazing, super hilarious. So deep work is a dangerous label because it implies that if you're not doing deep work, you're doing shallow work, and that's balls. Deep work is like this idea, like what there always is to do is to excavate like the deepest stuff, to go down to the heart of the soul and work there. And if you do that, then everything will shift. That's halfway true. Transformation is part that, because if I'm just trying to like change what I'm doing on the surface and I don't address anything underneath, I'm probably not going to get very good results. Sort of like that example I gave with pickup. If I retain this underlying story that I'm like afraid of women, I'm afraid of my own sexuality, I can like implement a set of steps to create sexual attraction and to have sex, but I'm going to be having sex over top of a fear that it's wrong. So it's never really going to be what I'm craving. I'm never going to fully feel expressed and alive in my sexing because it's still happening over top of that underlying story. So we have to get down to that. We have to do work in the realm of being. But the other part of coaching and transformation and leadership that really matters is the doing, where the road hits the pavement, where the wheel hits the pavement. I think that's the saying. I don't know. Makes more sense that way. Let's go with that one. So Corey's asking this question about like ontological work, but a lot of my work with people is in the realm, like kind of the boring realm of making declarations, for one. So making declarations is I'm going to do this by this date. That's simple. There's no deep work to that. There's no magic to that. It's just an invitation for someone to make a declaration by when they will do something. And then taking steps to do that something, making the declaration and then taking action to do it. And me holding their feet to the fire, not by forcing them to do it, but by simply asking questions that bring that back around to them. How's your declaration coming along? Have you taken that on? What's getting in the way? And as we ask those questions, it takes us down further into the depth of the work that's available. But doing deep work without that layer of like doing, without that layer of like declarations and accountability and taking action is pointless. It becomes very navel-gazy. And coaches and clients like to hang out here. They like to hang out in the realm of like deep work is what I do. And this lady that Corey's quoting is right. It doesn't really serve the person because what happens is it's just like each week is a new interesting conversation filled with insight, but there's no action. And so who the fuck cares? We have to take action for stuff to impact the world. The world is impacted through the actions that we take. And so I think she's right on the money that just focusing on the so-called deep work, it doesn't work. It doesn't serve the needs of the client. Magic happens, transformation happens when we combine doing with being, when we combine looking at the stories that someone is being in their life with taking the actions. And the other thing that this causes is that you might work with your client, you might work with the person you're leading to have them create a new story for themselves, a new way of being to step into. But that story has not yet fully been expressed into the world. And so the next thing that has to happen is they have to take actions in alignment with the new story while the old story still has power. So here's a silly example of that. I was waiting at a bus stop going to law school. I was in coach training, and what I discovered about myself, what I distinguished through the work I was in, was that who I was, like part of my essential nature, is connection. I thrive that way, and people feel that from me. But the story I'd learned to live into my life was I'm awkward, uncomfortable, hard to be around. People find me too much, and I'm an introvert, sort of, but also an extrovert. But that distinction sucks. Throw that distinction out. But that's how I'd learned to relate to myself. And so from that story about myself, I'd be super awkward when I was talking to people. I'd either fill every moment of silence with more conversation, desperately trying to ensure I wasn't awkward and uncomfortable, or leave the moment there was an awkward silence, which I still do sometimes. My friends called me out for it just the other day. I'm always integrating more and more of who I am. So I learned, oh, that's not who I am. It's just who I've learned to be. I'm not awkward or uncomfortable. I am connection. And I was waiting at the bus stop, and there was a guy that I recognized that I was doing free legal work, and I'd sat with him. We kind of knew each other. I talked to him a little bit, but that was it. And he was talking with someone else, and I'm like, it's awkward. I don't want to, I'll just create space. I'll put my head in my book. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to step into a new way of being. I want to step into this new story about who I am, connection. And so I had to take that action. It wasn't enough to just know in my head, oh, who I am is connection. I'm just going to trust that. That just creates more on your mental stack. The work for me was to go up to this guy and go, yo, I'm Adam. We know each other from blah, blah, blah. And guess what? I was super awkward and weird. But as I was willing to stay with him and this other guy in that process, the awkwardness melted. And then we had this conversation on the bus ride to school, and it was lovely. And I didn't talk to him again. So the point is, all of the awareness of who I am actually and what I'm really on this planet to be is irrelevant until I take that action to go and be aligned with who I've discovered is actually what I am. That's the moment that the work actually takes root. Until we do that, it's all just in our minds. And our minds are a beautiful place, and no transformation happens there. The transformation happens out here when we take actions. So deep work, not such a good thing to pride yourself on only working on. We want to make sure that we're supporting people in all the levels at which we can support them, the depth of being as well as the mundanity of action and doing. Reading what you wrote here, Jess. Jess says, honestly, the most transformational awareness I've gotten, particularly recently, have been the subtle, shallow, easy ones that sneak their way through my walls. And I love that you never know what is deep work for someone else. Indeed. One of the things that's so beautiful is at the start of working with me, I'll usually invite clients to declare actions, declare what's a declaration you're going to make, what's a project you want to work on. And they'll be like, I want to leave my job. And I'll be like, awesome. By when? By when do you want to leave your job? Right? That's calling them to task, right? Up until that moment, I want to leave my job is a nice fantasy. It's a wish to be fulfilled at some point. But as soon as they say by when, now they've got some skin in the game and they got some shit to do. And just that question, just that boring, stupid by when will drive up so much stuff. And then we have deep work to do. Then we can look at well, what are you making it mean? What are you resisting? What are you afraid will happen if you do this? What's the story producing that fear? And after we've looked at all that, you know where we want to come back to. Great. So you're clear that you're not that story. You're clear that this is who you are. You're clear that this is how you want to move your life forward. By when will you leave your job? We always bring it back to that. So it's sort of like you plant a flag in the sand on the surface and you go all the way subterranean and look at all of this stuff and excavate it all. And then we come back up to that flag and we finish it off. That's how we close the loop. So, Corey, those are my thoughts around coaches and the deep work. Uh, there's some stuff that we didn't get to today. I was going to talk a little bit. It might have been you, Seth, or maybe someone else who had written me about artificial generalized intelligence and the bleak outlook that that provides. So I'll talk about that next time we're solo here. And I want to talk about the art of distinguishing and the problem with the problem. We'll talk about that next week as well. So hope you enjoyed our show today. If you have suggestions, comments, feedback, please send it to me. You can put it in a comment there below. If this kind of work jives with you, I recommend you take the Forge with me. It's a program that runs from September to May. We all of what I'm talking about, you get the experience of that in your life, moving your projects forward, and then that allows you to better serve your clients through using that. So you can go to evergrowthcoaching.com/the-forge if you want to learn more about that, or you can have a conversation with myself or Bay or a member of our leadership team. And I feel like there's one more thing I want to talk about. Let me just figure out if it's there. I have no idea what it is. It's gone forever. We won't talk about it. Love y'all. Have an amazing weekend. I'm going to take my mom on a surprise birthday trip. My brother and I have a secret trip planned for her. So I don't know if she watches these, so I'm not going to reveal what it is. The reveal will be next time. Have an awesome weekend. Bye, y'all.